All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy. I am an alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And I have a home group in New Jersey on the Jersey Shore. It's called the Design for Living Group. I have a sponsor a lot of men. But most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was on March 28, 1987. And extremely grateful to be here. Thank Chris. Thank Jim, who organized this. A lot of good friends on here today. And I'm just truly grateful. Just to give you a quick little Mickey story, listening to Mickey just brought back a lot of memories for me. There was a gentleman, and some of you guys will know this guy. His name was Tom Needham from Staten Island, New York. And Tom was a guy that went in and out, and had a hard time staying sober. But he eventually went out to Denver, Colorado, to the Fellowship of the Spirit. And what happened there was he met a bunch of guys like Don Fritz and Mickey and Mike Lorenz and, just a whole host, Gary Brown, a whole host of guys. And he started a retreat in Staten Island, New York. And he started to bring all these guys from the Colorado area out to New York area. And for us guys in New York, we never heard this language before, this language of the heart that they spoke about. And I'll never forget, I went to this retreat. My wife didn't come with me, and Mickey was one of the presenters. Peter, who's on here now, he was the Saturday night speaker. And I remember going home, and I was like floored by what happened. And my wife was asking me, "Well, how was it?" And I said, "Oh, it was so good. We knew Peter for a long time, but this guy from Colorado, he just moved me in a way that I'd never been moved before." So fast forward. I run a thing called the Jersey Shore Big Book Retreat, and Peter was doing the first one. This is like 15 years ago, and Peter's doing the first one, and I have him matched up with the guy by the name of Ed Mutum. Ed Mutum was from Iowa. A lot of you guys might remember Pastor Ed, we called him, or Pastor Ed. Very tall guy, really nice guy, but he had a massive heart attack and died. And this is about 3 weeks before we're having this first Big Book Retreat. And my wife says, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Let me call this guy from Colorado. Maybe he'll come and do it. I don't know. He doesn't even." And we'll put him with Peter to do this first retreat. And I remember calling Mickey up, and I didn't even say anything about the retreat. And Mickey says, "You know what, Jimmy? I would really like to do a retreat with that guy, Peter." And it was like, this is why I'm calling. It's just unbelievable. And now he's Peter's sponsor. And I just think that is so unbelievable how, synchronicity, that word, how God connects the dots a lot of times. The first workshop I ever did was with Mickey in Cape Cod, and I was terrified because I felt so inadequate to be with this guy of faith, like I'm a lunatic, but Mickey made me feel part of this deal. So, it's just you have these memories like Glenn was just talking about, these memories of the people that you meet along the way, and it's just so good to, especially in the Zoom era, to see people that ordinarily we wouldn't see, and the last 24 hours I've been in Florida, Australia, and now California. I mean, I got Zoom lag, I've been all over the place, but thank God for that. And Glenn, of course, Glenn's a great help. We do a conference down in Tennessee, and Glenn and his wife, Jane. His wife, Jane, is like the most unbelievable seller. She can sell a rabbi a ham on a Saturday. Let me tell you, she's unbelievable. And my buddy Jack's out there, and Chris. And it's just so many good people here that we meet along this way, So I'm in this railroad room apartment. And if you don't know what a railroad room apartment was, in northern New Jersey, they were built like I think after World War I, around the metropolitan area in New York and New Jersey. And when a lot of people came through Ellis Island, they lived in these railroad room apartments. And basically they were these long apartments with many rooms, and everyone in your family lived in there. You had your grandparents, you had your uncles and aunts, you had your cousins. I mean, and here I find myself in this railroad room apartment this one particular day. And I'm getting the spiritual test, the spiritual test that a lot of us have gotten from someone who really cares about us. And I'm sitting in this railroad room apartment, and this guy invites me over to his house because the night before he basically told me, "You're screwed." And I looked at him and I said, "You're right. I need help." And I find myself in this apartment, and it's like it was like I walked into a circus. I mean, there's people everywhere. There's family. There's kids running around. Matter of fact, this guy had a dog. It was a Jack Russell, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with what a Jack Russell is, but the best way I could describe him, it was like giving a newcomer 40 cups of coffee at his first meeting. I mean, this dog was running around the walls. I mean, it was nuts, you know. But here I am. I'm getting that test, and the first test, the first question he asked me is, "How long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program without working the 12 steps?" Second question he asked me, "What makes you alcoholic?" And I had no idea what made me alcoholic. And I stammered out, "I drink too much." I had no idea about the physical allergy. I had no idea about this obsession. I had no idea about the unmanageability that goes on inside of us, drunk or sober. He asked me what my relationship with God looked like. I'm a good Catholic boy. I believe in God, but really, what does God have to do with any of this? Then he asked me a question that maybe some of you guys will never believe, but this is the way it was in my neighborhood back in the late 80s and early 90s. He said to me, "Where's your big book?" And I looked at him and I said, "What's a big book?" Now, the problem with that spiritual test is I'm not embarrassed by the answers. I'm probably more embarrassed to tell you that I was 5 years sober and an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous at the time. And back then, we didn't talk about the book like we talk about it today. The meetings in the neighborhood I grew up in was all about speaker meetings, discussion meetings, 12 and 12 meetings. And I'm sure there was a big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, on the literature table, or even maybe at a podium at times. But we were never encouraged to open up that book. Then he asked me a question. He goes, "Jimmy, if AA works, why do you have so many problems?" That's the big question. If AA works, why do you have so many problems? And what I've come to find out is because I've never been surrendered to a 12-step process. And I've never been surrendered to a God of my understanding. And, in the chapter, I'm going to talk about the third step in the beginning of the chapter, how it works. It's probably the most read 2.5 pages that we read in all our literature, And for a lot of times, that chapter or the thing we read at the beginning of our meeting just becomes words. And I don't even hear the words of how it works. And it's one of the most sacred things we have when we speak or when we open up a meeting. It's the first thing a newcomer is going to hear when we open up our meetings. And in that chapter, in that how it works, there's 2 big obstacles that I didn't even hear for a long period of time. 2 things that are going to keep me from getting sober and keep me from staying sober. And the first thing is honesty. And the second thing is a complete surrender to a God of my understanding. And here I am with 5 years of sobriety, 5 years without a drink in my system, sitting in this guy's apartment, dying of something I don't even know I'm dying of, something I don't even understand that I'm dying from. It's called untreated alcoholism. And I'm at that place where maybe a lot of us get, where I'm sober and I'm stuck. I'm at that place where I'm experiencing spiritual stagnation, spiritual apathy, whatever you want to call it. I'm kind of inactive. I'm unwilling. I'm resisting change because I'm afraid. But I don't want to tell you that I'm afraid because I have a persona to uphold. I'm a street guy, and I don't want to talk about what's going on inside me. I'm a good pusher inside. I don't want to show you my cards. I don't want to express emotion because God forbid you judge me. I'm paralyzed by what people think of me. And the worst part is I'm a prisoner of my thinking mind. And my thinking mind is filled with judgment against people like you and opinions of people like you. And I'm 5 years without a drink in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, setting up chairs, breaking down chairs, putting out literature, making coffee, doing all the things we do in our home groups. And I'm dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And how did I get here? How did I get to this place at 5 years without a drink in my system where I'm so untreated, where I'm so disconnected? Old timers used to say this all the time, that alcoholism is a soul sickness caused by a separation from God and a disconnect from each other. Why am I so disconnected? Why do I feel like I'm not part of? Why do I feel so separate from my fellow man? Why do I not believe in this power, or not so much believe, but why don't I rely on this power? How did I get to this place? I think a lot of us get to that place, you know. I like to tell you that I was born perfect, and I was quickly handed over to these two character defects called mom and dad. And I make a little joke about that, but it really becomes the theme of my life. Before drinking, during drinking, and even into sobriety. That delusion that it's not my fault. A lot of us are walking around with that delusion, that victimization. And the problem with that is you could drink yourself to death and it's not my fault. But see, I'm the kind of guy that just blames everyone out there for the way I feel in here. And I don't know why I am that way. Mickey says it all the time when he speaks. Where does it hurt? I wish I could tell you where it hurt. Why do I feel so insecure? Why do I feel like I'm not part of? Why do I have all this fear and emotion? And why can't I express myself the way I really want to feel? So I'm growing up in this family that all they ever wanted to do was give me love and morals and values. I got this mom and dad, they just want to take care of the kids. I grew up in a neighborhood where the only requirement for membership was 5 or more kids. It's the 60s. I'm 62 years old. It's a very blue collar neighborhood I grew up in. Cops, firemen, truck drivers, warehouse workers, union workers, not much education. Everything I learned is on the street corner. Everything I saw in my life is growing up on the street corner. And I always like to make a joke. I steal this line, but I like it because, if you got me and my friends on the corner and somebody said, hey, there's a dead bird, we'd all look up. I mean, that's the kind of education we have, But I'm growing up in this neighborhood, and this disease of perception that you hear so many times in Alcoholics Anonymous, the way I see alcohol, the way I see what drinking does for people. Again, I'm growing up in this neighborhood, and there's a party for everything. And in every house has a lot of kids, and there's birthday parties, and there's christenings, and graduations, and the common denominator is always alcohol, is always there. And see, as a young kid at 6, 7, 8 years old, I could see the magic that happens by taking that first drink. Because I got this guy, Dad. My dad's a tough guy. My dad's a Korean War veteran. My dad's the kind of guy that doesn't express emotion. We all say, I'll never be like my father. Well, I turned into my father. My dad doesn't express emotion. My dad is filled with anger and rage a lot of the time. I always like to joke around, if you see a butcher and they got those aprons on, my dad would have that apron on, and there'd be blood all over the apron. And there's some days I thought, did he kill a cow today, or did he pull somebody out at a red light and just beat the guy up? I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. But what I would witness as a young kid is the ease and comfort that would come at once by taking that first drink. And every night at 5 o'clock, my mom would make these 2 pitchers, martinis and Manhattans. And my dad would walk in and huffing and gruffing and puffing. And he'd take that first drink and he became a different person. Became a different person. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Became the guy that wanted to have a catch. He became the guy that wanted to have, joke around. But then there was those days. Some of us experience these days where the violence would break out in our house. All of a sudden, my father would be throwing the plates across the kitchen, and throwing the chairs across the kitchen. Once in a while, he'd grab one of us kids, we'd be flying across the kitchen. And again, I don't know, from that young age, I was able to just suppress those emotions, suppress those feelings of fear, suppress those secrets that were going on in my house, because you didn't talk about stuff that went on in your house. You didn't bring that out into the neighborhood. You didn't talk about any of that stuff. Everything got swept under the rug. And hopefully tomorrow will be a better day. So that's how I grew up. So this perception, this idea of drinking, to me, is going to be fun. And 49 years ago, I can remember like it happened this morning. I take my first drink. And I'm in a cemetery with 5 guys. And I got those strong warnings that we get from our parents saying, you better not be with those guys. But here I am, and here comes that first bottle. It's Colt 45 malt liquor. It seems to be the first choice for a lot of us. And then here comes that second bottle. It's Mohawk Blackberry Brandy. You'll hear a term in Alcoholics Anonymous that we live life forward, but we understand it backwards. You know, I look back 49 years ago, I know what I'm up against. I couldn't tell you back then, I couldn't tell you for a long time, but I look back now and I know that I'm alcoholic out of the gate. Because on day one, not only did I black out, not only did I puke purple for 2 weeks, not only did I took a beating from my father, not only did I get grounded for life, but the hook was in. And I knew, as my good friend Peter says all the time, I had no power, choice, or control in my body once I took that first drink. But I also know that the second leg of that three-legged stool was in place too. That obsession, that idea that's so strong it overcomes all other ideas. I can't wait till next week. I can't wait till next Friday. I can't wait to be with the guys again and recreate what just happened this first night. It's the thing I chase. And what I didn't know is that third piece of the puzzle, that thing that's deep down within, that soul sickness that the old timers talk about, that feeling of inadequacy that's deep down in every one of us. Well, for me anyway. And all I know is on that day one, I poured booze into that hole and I felt like a different person. I heard Peter say a line the other day that really jumped out at me. He said, my alcoholism gets a life by taking mine. Because over the next 16 years of my life, my active addiction, my active drinking, yeah, I could tell you about, the ego wants to tell you about the fun times, but my ego doesn't want to talk about the pain and suffering that happened. And I'm living this double-edged sword because you see, somewhere along the line, three emotions really came into play here on me. The emotion of shame, the emotion of guilt, and the emotion of remorse. And see, I thought I could outrun those three things. Matter of fact, I lived under the delusion of coming into Alcoholics Anonymous that if I put the plug in a jug, those magically would disappear. But thank God for the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I had to deal with that stuff. Because I had great shame. Shame for the person I become. Shame for all the failures. Shame for not being a family member. The shame of walking out of a marriage after 40 days. The shame, it just built up. The guilt and the remorse, the things I did to people, the harms I caused to other people, the people that cared and loved me. It was great guilt on that stuff. Great remorse for the way I felt. And over those 16 years, you know, how do I address that stuff? And I don't even know how to put that stuff into words. So I pour booze on it. Or I become that guy, that double-edged guy. You know, I become the double-edged sword guy. Because like I said earlier, I'm the guy that blames everything out there for the way I feel in here. But I also become the guy that seeks things out there to fix this inside thing. So booze and drugs and money and gambling and cars and women and all that other stuff becomes what I think is the answer to my problem. I become a chameleon. I become somebody, you know, I start to pretend to be somebody I'm not. And that first surrender came for me, and it's probably it is the most important surrender. It's the most important surrender for all of us. The day we walk in before AA, the day before day one. And I'm in Newark Airport and I'm dying. I'm dying of this thing called alcoholism. And it was probably the first acknowledgement that drinking was really a problem at this point. I just turned 29 years old. I've been living on the streets for about 18 months. I'm putting my head down wherever I can put my head. I'm ashamed to call my family, who doesn't know that I'm around. I don't call the wife that I walked out on. She's wife in limbo at this point. Nobody knows where I'm at. And I'm just walking the streets. And I'm just hanging out. And I'm just drinking my day away. Because shame and guilt and remorse is eating my lunch on a daily basis. And what happens is I go to a bar one day and these two old timers say, go to Newark Airport. They're hiring guys like you. And I walk into Newark Airport and I sit down on this chair. And for years, I couldn't tell you how I really felt. I couldn't tell you how I felt till I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and eventually opened that book. I read Bill's story on page 8. Bill put words, his first experience, put words to my experience. Bill says no words could tell the loneliness and despair I felt in a bit of morass of self-pity That quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I've met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. I know I was dying. And in the next 3, 4, 5 minutes, a complete stranger sat next to me. And at that time, people weren't asking me how my 401 was doing or how the kids are doing. This gentleman looked at me and said, "What's your problem?" And I spit out my life story on this guy in 10 minutes. And he said, "I have the answer for you." And what happened was he pulled out a piece of paper and he goes, "You know where this street is?" I said, "Yeah, it's in my old neighborhood." He put a number in front of that street. He said, "Try not to drink the rest of this day and be in front of that house at 7 o'clock tonight." But for the grace of God, I didn't take a drink that day, and I was in front of that house at 7 o'clock that night. And that complete stranger pulled up in a car with the other strangers, and they said the most important or most spiritual thing you hear in AA: get in the car. And I got in the car with these guys, and they took me around the corner to my grammar school, where I had all sorts of contempt towards God, towards religion, towards Catholicism, you name it. And they walked me into that school. And it was my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. For years, I thought it was bingo. Who knew it was AA? But I've been here ever since, and it really starts my journey. And like I said, sitting in that railroad room apartment, man, I know my life was dark drinking. But what I didn't understand is how dark my life got not drinking. I didn't understand the darkness I was living in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I speak of the word darkness, what I'm talking about is the secrets I was holding on to, the dishonesty that I was doing, the double life that a lot of us lead, becoming a fraud, a pretender, a spectator, One of the greatest readings I've ever read, because it really resonates with me and really shows you my life, is in a book called Daily Reflections. Not a book that I read a lot, pick it up once in a while. But on May 1st, they had this reading that really, really, really just hits me between the eyes. And what it says on that day is, it's the side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my heart, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light, and walk into fear to find the peace. And I love reading that because that's where I was at 5 years without a drink, in total darkness. In total darkness. Bill writes in How It Works, "I wonder why I had so much resistance to change. I wonder why I couldn't let go. I was so fearful to join you people on this path. I would hear your stories, but there was something blocking me from getting on that path that you all talked about." And when I read what Bill read or Bill wrote and How It Works, when he says that some of these we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Why can't I let go? Why can't I let go? And what I've come to find, it's one word. It's called pride. See, the book talks about that resentment is the number one offender. It kills more alcoholics than anything. But my experience through the years and my experience through sponsorship of many men is that my pride will kill me a lot faster than a resentment. Because my pride looks like this: I'm only giving my sponsor 20% of what's really going on. My pride is the essence of my self-centeredness that I'm going to find out about in this third step. My pride is the thing that justifies all my character defects. My pride is the thing that keeps moving me away from God. So that's why I'm having so much trouble at this time of my career, time of my life. It's because my pride stands in the way. But I sat with this guy, Bill, and we sat in that apartment, and that dog ran around the walls. And I started to open up the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I finally started to see what I was really up against. I started to see about this physical allergy, this phenomena called craving. I started to identify that through the story, Bill's story, and to see Bill's story. I got into those early chapters, There is a Solution, all that other stuff. But the thing that really made me see the truth about me was when Bill had me in the doctor's opinion, in that famous paragraph when it says, men and women love the effect produced by alcohol. I haven't had a drink in 5 years. This guy, Bill, was watching me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He would talk about, Jimmy, when I see you in a meeting of AA, you share violently, you share aggressively, you share things that just show you how disconnected you are from God. And what he did was he backdoored me on that paragraph by talking about men and women love the effect produced by anger. But you see, at 5 years of sober, plus 5 years of not drinking, I'm probably the angriest guy in AA. We got one of them in every home group. Angry Tom, angry Mary, angry Jimmy. And that's me. And I love the effect produced by my anger. I love the effect to stand over my ex-wife and dominate her with my presence. And I feel the ease and comfort that comes at once by doing that. And then after I go through that emotional washing machine, I come out emerging remorseful and guilty and shame-ridden. I'll never do that again, only to do it over and over and over. And unless I have this psychic change, there's very little hope for my recovery. So what I witnessed and what I understood at 5 years of without a drink is I'm a prisoner of my mind. I'm a prisoner of judgment. I'm a prisoner of opinion. And I'm trying to control everything. And as I started to go into that third step, and I understood that I needed power, I started to go into that third step. And Bill uses one of the greatest lines I ever think that's written in this book, how dark it is before the dawn. Because as I'm going through this step, or as I'm going through, these early pages, and I come through those ABCs, am I convinced of those ABCs? Am I convinced I'm an alcoholic based on the information that I'm reading? I'm an alcoholic and I cannot manage my own life. Am I convinced that probably no human power ever relieved me of my alcoholism? Am I convinced that God could and would have if he was sought? I finally understood what I was really up against, this thing called alcoholism, this phenomenon called craving, this obsession, this spiritual malady deep within me, the unmanageability that goes on in the second half of that first step. I never felt this feeling of defeatedness, this feeling of that I'm powerless over control, that I can't change anyone. I think that's the great news that I found out in the third step, that not only am I powerless over drinking and drugs and a lot of other things, I'm powerless over control. But the great news is this, that I don't have to change anyone in my life in order to get better. I just need to change myself. And then finally, what Bill did for me that day is he was a salesman. He sold me on the first step, that unless I do these things, I'm going to drink again. And as we hear so many times, my first step experience is I'm going to drink again. But what he did sell me on was hope. And that's what we sell here for the newcomer, that there's hope here, that there is a way out. Being convinced is the first requirement. It's not a suggestion. And I love how Bill brings us into this idea of that we're the directors of life. Being convinced, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Just what we mean by that, and just what do we do? And that first requirement, that my life run on my will is hardly the success. How do I know that? Let's take a picture of it. Let's look over your life. How's it going, Jimmy? And I had a lot of conversations with this guy before drinking, during drinking, and in sobriety. What does it look like to try to run my life? What does it look like to be self-reliant? What does it look like to just, run the show? And I love the lines that Bill puts in here. What are the conditions I put on all the relationships I'm in? And what I started to understand is I put conditions on every relationship I'm in. I put expectations on every person I know in my life. There's a thing we say is the script violator. As the director, I give everyone a script every day. And whether it's someone in my home, or it's somebody on my job, somebody in AA, I give you a script. And the minute you don't follow my script, you become that script violator. Now, that sounds kind of corny and ridiculous. But who's the person who feels the resentment when you don't do what I want? And I live under that delusion. And there's a lot of delusions we live with in our alcoholism. One is the victim. Because if you don't do what I want, you're trying to go after me. And for many of us, we spend many years in Alcoholics Anonymous writing column 3. Column 3, where my ego and where judgment and where all those things reside. Where this is where I build the case against all the people who are not doing what I want.
Jimmy, you muted yourself.
Okay, I'll start from the beginning. I'm Jimmy and I'm an alcoholic. No. So anyway, I'm just letting you know that I'm just a director of life, and and I'm the boss of life, and and basically, going through those pages in the third step, what usually happens when I'm trying to run the show, it doesn't go off very well, and all of a sudden I take things personal. All of a sudden I think you're going after me. And as it says, our actor is self-centered, selfish, dishonest, I'm like the retired businessman who lives in Florida, Everything is perfect here, Mom. But the thing that really cracked me open is when I turned the page, I got onto 62. See, I've always been pointed towards that way to blame me for the way I feel in here. But now the book kind of boomeranged on me and tells me that my real problem is in here. That selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my trouble. And I start to look at my life and I can start to see that it isn't alcohol. It's my selfishness and self-centeredness. That I'm driven by a lot of old ideas about a lot of things. The book has up to this point asked us numerous times to please set aside all those old ideas about what? Everything. Because I live under the delusion that my life should look like this. My life should look like this when it comes to my health and my well-being. My life should look like this when it comes to finances. My life should look like this when it comes to my job. My life should look like this when it comes to family or relationships. My life should look like this when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous, And the minute that it doesn't look like it's supposed to look in my eyes, that's where I get all my conflicts. And I don't see it. Because when they talk about the roots, like a tree, where are the roots? It's under the surface. So I walk around Alcoholics Anonymous, I walk around life with a lot of old ideas about a lot of things. And I don't even see that I am the way I am. Because some of this stuff is 30 years old. Some of this stuff is 40 years old. Some of this stuff was put into me by my father, by my mother, by teachers, by you name it. And I think it's truth. And what I had to start examining and what I had to start challenging is some of the beliefs that I'm walking around with in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I get on page 62, it tells me that my mind is driven by hundreds of forms of fear and self-pity and self-delusion, self-dishonesty. I don't even know that I'm that way. And it mirrors my old ideas. Because again, if my old ideas are not happening, then I'm driven by fear. I try to manipulate. I try to change you. I try to get what I want. And all I do is step on the toes of my fellows and I retaliate. So it was really about seeing that my troubles are of my own making. That I have to stop pointing out there for the way I feel in here. I have to learn how to stop taking stock honestly. This guy, Bill, made this visualization for me. He goes, Jimmy, it's really simple. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to step into the sunlight of the spirit. And like I do with many guys downstairs at my kitchen table, and like some of you guys probably do, this idea of this sunlight of the spirit. I sit at my table and there's a long hallway. And at the end of the hallway, there's a glass door that leads out into the beautiful sunny day on the Jersey Shore right now. And it's really easy to get outside in the sunlight of the spirit. And out there's a place of freedom. Out there, there's a place of a connection with God, a connection with each other. Out there's a place of neutrality where I'm safe and protected, where I stop fighting anyone and anyone. And all these promises that we read in this book come true. And when I step out there, what I start to understand that is God is doing for me, which I could never do for myself. But in order to get out there, I have to walk through this dark hallway of life. And I have to uncover, discover, and discard the things that have been blocking me from that freedom. You see, that's the scary part of this whole deal. Making this decision to get off my ass and to walk through the fire. Because as the old timers said, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous really is. It's a big bonfire. And many people in AA walk around the fire. And they stay warm until the fire goes out. But if you really want to change, Jimmy, you need to walk through that fire and get your ass burned to feel the uncomfortability of change. And to go through that hallway and to uncover, discover, and discard the things that have been blocking you. So this decision really is based on the fact that my self-reliance has failed me repeatedly. Step one, I know the problem. Step two, I know the solution. Step three, it's really just a decision to get off my rear end and to start walking through that thing. And to do something for a guy like me that's very scary, become vulnerable. Because I'm a street guy, and vulnerability equates to weakness. And what I don't understand is vulnerability equates to strength. And the walls that I've built around myself for the last 30, 40 years need to come down. My sponsor says most of us ride through life in a tank. And we all have that little hole, you know, our perception is limited. And we just blow people away as we walk through life. But this decision, based on the fact that self-reliance has failed me, that I got to stop playing God. Why? The second shortest line in the literature. It doesn't work. And constantly, I'm reminded when I get back into the director's chair, it just doesn't work. And see, I think my character defects have value sometimes. I think my anger works for me sometimes. I think if my wife walked in, I know that if I get angry enough, I could push her away from me. But I also know that I could use my anger because I'm a great manipulator, like maybe some of us here, where I could pull her in and to give me what I want. And I think a lot of us know how to do that. So I need to see as I go into this whole way of life that these character defects have no value at all. That I got to get rid of them promptly without regret. That it just doesn't work for a guy like me. And the decision really is a simple thing. Stop playing God. You know, I love the lines that Bill uses, you know. Next, we decide that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be the director. Get out of the director's chair, Jim. Used to hear things like, Jim, get off the cross. We need the wood. I mean, you know, those kind of things. But God's the director of my life. He's my employer. Now, like it says, you know, he is the principal. We are the agents. You know, we hear this analogy a lot. You see sports stars out there, Tiger Woods, all the big football players, baseball players, they're the principal. They got agents. The agents go out and work for the principal. They get the endorsements, they get the commercials, they get all the things for them. So what this concept, though, or this third step concept is really is about that I'm going to work for God. He's my employer, and I'm going to work for God. And what does God want me to do? Help his kids. The basic service of Alcoholics Anonymous. Glenn talked about it. Service. One drunk talking to another. The single greatest therapy we've ever had here. And if I do those things, it's going to give me a really something that I've come to really understand that's important in my life. Because I had an ideal of what a father was. And I loved my father, and we bumped heads a lot. But my father took care of us. And see, that's the gift. That if God is the employer and I work for God, God's going to take care of me. That's how simple that decision is. You know, and again, Bill is building a spiritual structure in our minds. We're trying to build this archway, this this door that we're going to walk out into the sunlight of the spirit. And we just laid down the foundation of willingness. And you can't build an 80-story building on an inch slab of willingness. My willingness must be strong. My willingness must be deep. And what makes me willing? Well, as a lot of friends say all the time, a good whooped ass makes me willing. Circumstances make me willing. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. Sick and tired of being sick and tired sober. And the willingness to start building a spiritual foundation that eventually will walk through a free man. And so this concept was the keystone in a new and triumphant march which we passed to freedom. And the cool thing about that, like anything else in the book, is when we start taking certain actions, we start getting certain promises. And the promises on top of page 63 are, I know the 9-step promises are always read. A lot of times the 10-step promises are read. The way I see it, or the way I've been told, there's over 225 promises in his book, all as a direct result of action. So here's a simple action. I'm on my knees with this guy, Bill Grace, and I'm holding his hands. First time, I'm 32 years old. I'm holding another man's hands for the first time in my life. I'm embarrassed by this. You see, I'm a homophobe. I'm a racist. I'm a bigot. I don't know what the hell I am. I just know that it feels weird to hold another man's hands. But I'm making this decision because for some part of me, I just want to be free. I'm listening to another man share his experience. I want what he has. And I get on my knees and I open the book. He knows the prayer. We're reading that prayer. I can't tell you how many guys I've held hands with now through the years, how many guys I've sponsored, how many guys I've taken through steps. And it's a weird feeling because when you hold their hands, you can feel them shaking sometimes because they're afraid. You can feel the sweat in their palms sometimes because they're afraid. And then you feel some guys that just have a grip on you because they want what you have. And all they want you to do is lead them to this doorway, this archway of freedom. And here I am. I do this with this guy, Bill. I make this decision that God's in charge. I'm going to work from God. From this point forward, I'm going to try to carry out this mission, the mission to help others, and to try to put aside or set aside my ambitions and my goals and all this, not to so much my ambitions or goals, but just my self-centered ways. Because if I do that, God's going to take care of me. And as it says on the top of the page on 63, when we take this position, or sincerely take this position, all sorts of remarkable things follow. We had a new boss. I'm not the boss anymore. Why? It doesn't work. Simplest line in the book. It doesn't work. And since God is all powerful, he will provide what we need if we keep close to him and perform his work well. What's that work? To help others. God will provide everything I need, not my wants, but God will give me everything I ever needed if I just do the job. And what's the job? Help others. Establish on such footing. What footing is that? That's that new cement that we just put down there of willingness, this new foundation that many of us are now living on. We become less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and our designs, my little manipulation, my way of getting my way. And more, we become interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. We become the agent. How can I help you? How can I serve you? What can I do for you? I'll pick you up and take you to a meeting tonight. Come on, I'll get you a cup of coffee. Here's a big book. Here's a piece of literature. You know where you're going tomorrow night. Here's some phone numbers. Here's some guys you need to talk to. Carrying the message in every possible way that I can. As we feel this new power flow in, why? Is because I'm starting to open up. And rather than being filled with self, I'm starting to be filled with other, with God's power. As I start to feel this power flow in, here's some of the gifts. We enjoy peace of mind, soundness of mind, serenity. The squirrels stop running in my head. In the giving, I start to get. In the giving, I start to calm. In the giving, I start to experience peace. In the giving, it's not about me anymore. It's about you. And see, what I don't understand is the payback. But the more I help you, the better I get. Isn't that a weird paradox? The more I help, the more I get. And I'm not talking materialistically. I'm talking living with the principles of the spiritual world versus living with the rules of the material world. That there's a shift in consciousness as I go from all about that crap that's out there that I think is going to make me feel better to a place of just bringing principled or the liver principled life where all of a sudden by me helping you, I get more. That's unbelievable to me. And for so many years, I chased more. And little do I know that more is deep down in every man, woman, and child. It's called God. It just has been blocked by pomp, worship of other things, and calamity. And as I walk into that hallway of life and this stuff starts to come out, I start to feel better about who I am. But more importantly, I start to form relationships, honest relationships. I start to form bonds with other men. And as I look at some of you guys now that I've known for years, this connection that we have, again, like the old timers used to say, a soul sickness caused by a separation from God, a disconnect from each other. How many of us are lonely in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? How many of us isolate in the rooms of that's the one bad part about Zoom. I could just sit in his office all day long and just isolate and not call any of you and not talk to anybody and just get in my head and just let it all go. But see, this decision that God's the boss, I work for God, and God will take care of me. So as I feel this new power flow in, we enjoy peace of mind, and that we discover we could face life successfully. We become conscious of his presence. We start to awake to the power within. I start to awake to a presence that I never knew existed in my life. We begin to lose the fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. There's an old line that says it's by dying that one awakens. We start to wake up to the truth. We start to waken up to what this is really about, what life is really about. And God brings us back to where we all started before all the nonsense in our life started, the drinking, the drug, and the criminal activity, or maybe just sitting at home as a single mom and just washing your day away with wine. We get back to the place where we all started, where assets were really the good things in our lives, not the flaws. And as I said this prayer with this guy, Bill, and like I've heard so many times from so many of you guys, sounds kind of old, 1935 language. Put the prayer in your own words. Put the prayer in your own words, right? But make sure you say the prayer. We get those promises, and again, the prayer is just an affirmation. It's an affirmation of that decision that I work for God, and the job is to take care of me. Now, to go deeper into that hallway, our next speaker, Kelly, will talk about that. But there's a time element. We hear this all the time. When I got off my knees with this guy, Bill, and held his hands, he said, Jimmy, next, we launch on a course of vigorous action, strenuous action. See, the idea is when I come off my knees, I have some momentum now because I want what you have, and I'm willing to go to any length to do so. And what that means is I need to get off my knees and I got to start inventorying. I got to start going down the causes and conditions of the things in my life that are blocking me from God. And probably the most important thing that I got out of that third step, and probably the third step prayer, the most important thing I really understood from this moment forward is that God thinks you mean it. That God really thinks that you really want to go to any length. That God really thinks that you're looking to change your life and to become dependent upon him and to become reliant upon power. Lack of power is my dilemma. I need a power source in my life in order to be successful. And over and over and over again, inventory will show me the manifestations of living a life on self-will, that all I do is walk around with anger, resentment, fear, guilt, shame, and remorse. And the good news that we shout from the rooftops is that you can be free of all that, and you can step into that sunlight of the spirit and be a free man or a free woman. But it's only a decision. There's a lot of work to do. Thank you for my life.